everyone, in spite of the fact that it has the title of fathers and sons, because everyone here has a father. And a number are fathers here. So we all have the experience. But what I want to talk about today is how that each and every one of our experience when it comes to fathers is different. And as a result of that difference, we have certain thoughts around all of that. They can be good thoughts, and they can be bad thoughts, and they can be all kinds of different things. And so what I'd like to do is take a parable that Jesus gave in Luke chapter 15 and look at it in terms of a father and two sons. And as my wife and I were talking about yesterday, that in the Bible you don't find a lot of examples in terms of daughters, of women. But we have to understand something. The culture was such at that particular period of time that if you were to use, let's say, a parable, this man had a woman, a daughter, and all of that, that in that particular culture, unfortunately, it would have been given no credence. Because daughters in man's society, not in the Heavenly Father's society, but in man's society, were minimized, to say the least. And as we move forward in life, as God opens our minds to understand what He originally had in mind and the intention, we recognize, hey, we've missed the mark big time in that regard. So we want to take a look at these two sons, and we want to take a look at it from, again, in a timely manner, because tomorrow's Father's Day. And there are all kinds of cards out there that are for fathers, and oftentimes you're looking for the right card. And if you have found this to be so, there are certain cards that don't fit. And unfortunately, they don't fit. You know, it's like, here's a Father's Day. Dad, you were always there for me. No, got to put that one away. That one doesn't apply. Dad, to know you is to love you. I don't even know who you are. You know. Dad, you were always upbeat. That is upbeating me. And like, I found this because I was looking for a Father's Day card for one of my sons, and it was like, okay, this card, I want to say something in this card. And so in searching that, I found that to happen. And so when we think of this example in Luke chapter 15 about these two sons and the parable, of course, Jesus gives us the parable, and Jesus certainly knows what He's talking about. And the example is a huge lesson to us in terms of sons and how they interact and how they see their parents. In this particular case, how they see their father. So, as we go through this, let's kind of understand there are lessons for all of us to learn in this regard. So, Jesus begins this parable in Luke chapter 15 and verse 11. And Jesus continued because He's been talking about things that are lost. Lost sheep, lost coins, and sometimes relationships in families are lost. And sometimes somewhat permanently, and other times a little less permanently. There was a man who had two sons. The younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." So he divided his property between him. And now you can again read all these things in. The older has issues and the younger has issues. I think that we have found that children are different. I have always marveled at people will make the statement, "I treat all my kids the same." I'm thinking, how tragic is that? Because they're not the same. You treat them as you need to treat them. There's some movement in all of this. And as we understand the grace of God more, we become less legalistic in all these things. We recognize certain children are easy to get along with. Certain ones are a little hardwired and harder to get along with. So not long after that, the younger son got together all that he had. He set off for a distant country, and he squandered his wealth in wild living. And after he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in the whole country, and he began to be in need. Now, it's when you got everything, you don't think there's going to be a famine. But, the reality, and I think people who live longer recognize, well, wait a minute, you need to save for a rainy day. We've got a lot of examples. Joseph, we've got examples in our own life. Well, it was going good, and wow, I was spending this, driving a new car, all these things, and now I don't have a car. So anyway, he squandered it, and after he spent everything, he was in need. And so, verse 15, so he went and he hired himself out to a citizen of that country who sent him to the fields to feed pigs. A life lesson here. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. So, wow. I could use a little of that corn, a little of that slop would taste good to me. When he came to his senses, now it's an amazing place that where should he come to his senses? In a pig pen. But there's lessons in life about that. Sometimes you can find yourself in a pig pen and you look around and say, what's wrong with this picture? And the like. So he says, he looks around and he says, he came to senses, how many of my father's hired men have food to spare? Well, now that says something about his father, the people that he hired. Not only did they, notice the difference here, it isn't that they had food. Is that they had food to spare. And we think about that even in terms of living, and even as you think about that in terms of a living wage, it isn't that you live from hand to mouth, but that in a person who is a caring father pays his hired servants and pays them enough that they actually can have some left over. Because that changes everything in life, how you act and how you interact. But he says, they have food to spare, and here I am starving to death. I will set out and go back to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. So he starts in essence with God. I have sinned against heaven and against you. But notice there's a difference in this than, Father, I'm entitled. I have a right. I have rights here, and I want my rights back. Oh, yes, I made some silly and dumb choices, but I want my rights back here. No, he says, I've sinned against heaven and against you. Notice here, I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired men. So he got up, and he went to his father. So he's thinking, he's processing all of that, and then he follows through. He decides he's going to make that journey back to his father. While he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him, and he ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and he kissed him. Now, in and of itself, this is quite an incredible story. So I'm going to throw something out here while I'm thinking about it so that you don't miss the point. I don't believe this is the first time that the father stood on the front porch looking off in the distance, hoping that he would see someone walking down, as we would call it, walking down the lane, coming back home. I think the father probably spent lots of nights on the front porch and lots of daylight, sunrises, looking and waiting. So I think that's important for us to realize that the father was the kind of father that he was. So he did that. He hugged and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. Now, this is interesting because, wow, and the change. If you get hugged and kissed by your father, then you tend to forget why you came in the first place.
feeling the blues today or tired of life already? Do you have questions about life or need spiritual advice? The Worldwide Church of God is located in Fairfield, Santa Rosa, and Modesto, California. We welcome everyone to attend our worship services with us every week at the times listed on your screen.